Hello, how are you? I hope you're doing well. But if you're not, that's okay too. And this episode is for you. Today, we're going to dive into a topic that's very dear to my heart from lived experience, from the experience that I see my clients going through, my listeners, and individuals that send me messages talking about their experience job hunting. And I don't think that I have spoken about it enough on the podcast. And it just occurred to me that it deserved a proper episode. We're going to discuss loneliness in job hunting. And because this is a important topic, I have notes. So if you're watching me on YouTube and you realize that I'm reading, it's because I am, because I did some research and I did investigate this and I wanted to make sure I was approaching it in the best possible way. Now, many times loneliness can be really deep and really difficult and ingrained, and ideally, you would want to get help for that. So, this is important that this is not advice, these are tips and ideas and stories from my personal experience. And I'm not here to diagnose you, and I am here to support you as a friend. That's what this podcast is all about. So, with that disclaimer, I really do hope that you stick around because I am going to give some tips and ideas on strategies that I think can help you because it has helped me and it has helped some of my clients as well. Hi, I'm Renata Bernardi, and this is the Job Hunting Podcast, where I interview experts and professionals and discuss issues that are important for job hunters and those who are working to advance their careers. So make sure that you subscribe and follow, and let's dive right in. Loneliness in job hunting is weird because you could be surrounded by people and still feel completely isolated in your job search, in your insecurities and anxieties. So it's not just about being alone in a house or single, it's about being the only one without a job in your circle of friends, in your family. It's about being the only person following an odd career path, different from your friends and other expectations that people had about you, trying something different and feeling isolated because people don't understand or don't have the experience of what you're going through. You may have no one to talk to about the issues or dreams that you have for your career, or maybe you have people to talk to, but you feel like you're not being heard or you're not being understood because they have different lived experiences, they have different career trajectories. I see this a lot as well with clients of mine that are first in the family in a corporate world. They might come from a blue collar background. Sometimes they're the first one to go through university. Sometimes people look up to them and see them as having achieved so much, and you can be quite lonely at the top. You can be quite lonely when you're doing something that's different from what other people have done before you. The issue of loneliness in adults has had a lot of interest lately, especially after the pandemic or during the pandemic and after the pandemic. It's been talked a lot about, especially in regards to workplace loneliness and how we now work, because we are more isolated and we lack the contact that we used to have before. And in many ways, that has also affected the way that we look for work and we access our networks. I have always been very keen to network, but I can see how, even for somebody like me, if I had lost my job during the pandemic, it would have been so much harder for me to access my network just because everybody is kind of out and about in their own homes, not going into town and into business districts and the office as much as they used to. They might be going a few days a week. And there's lack of contact, of physical bumping into each other contact that used to happen a lot in the past. And that opportunistic approach to reach out to people and ask them for advice or tell them that you were looking for work, it needs to be more active than passive these days. You probably have seen that happen. And there's so much data about this that I want to share with you because I think it's important. It gives us context. And in many ways, data about loneliness makes us feel less lonely. So, US is great to get data from, and this podcast is mostly listed in the US, even though I'm in Australia. And in the US, 1 in 3 adults have reported feeling lonely at least once a week this year. That like last year, 2023, and in 2024. And this is prevalent in all ages, but mostly young adults. So people that are between 18 and 34, with about 30 of that age group feeling more lonely more times a week. So everybody's feeling lonely. If you're a younger professional, there's a bigger chance of you feeling even more lonely. This data reflects this nature of loneliness happens across various age groups. And sometimes you might feel lonely because you're young, or because you're single, or because you're older, and you don't have people that you grew up with living near you. Or there are always potential explanations, but that doesn't mean that you are unique in feeling lonely. Then there is this issue of generation. So, in the way that loneliness is perceived, because that's the thing about loneliness as well, it can be so subjective. And millennials, those that are born between 81 and 96, so my oldest son is a millennial, they report a high incidence of loneliness, with 73% acknowledging feeling lonely. And this contrasts with 30% of Generation X, that's me, people that are born between 1965 and 1980, and they only occasionally report feeling lonely. And then if you're older than me, and then you consider a senior citizen if you're born before 65, then that goes down with 28% living alone, but they still are saying, yeah, we feel isolated, we feel lonely. But it's really interesting because senior citizens are living alone, but the perception of loneliness seems to be higher with millennials. And I find that really interesting. And I want us to kind of reflect on that because it is a mindset. And I'm always interested in sort of how the mind perceives what we're going through, and depending on our education, our culture, our traits, right? Being introvert or extroverted and so forth. It's really, really fascinating to me. Then there's gender. So, gender wise, loneliness is equally distributed between men and women. So, 46% of men and 45% of women describe feeling lonely. Interestingly, however, college women report feeling more lonely than men. So if you're in college, so that means that you're younger, women feel more lonely than men, which is interesting. I also am concerned about health issues because when we think about health, we think about smoking, we think about eating and heart disease and all of those sort of things that we can see, that affects us in a way that's very conspicuous. And we hardly ever think about things like loneliness and stress levels and lack of sleep, and how that can be so detrimental for our health in the long term, especially if they are chronic. So, if you're feeling lonely for many, many, many months or years, if you're feeling like you're stressed for a long period of time, those things can be really detrimental to your health and be just as bad risk factors as smoking, as eating too much bad food, and so on. And we kind of haven't really gone there yet in our minds in understanding that and identifying that as a priority for us. So, this can mean that we may need to consider our social situation and activating that, not so that we become more popular or less lonely for social reasons, but for health reasons. right? Changing the way that we live, changing the way that we work. For some people, working from home is fantastic if they're raising kids, if they're, have other hobbies or side hustles or priorities in their lives. Working from home can be great, but for many people, it can be detrimental to their mental health. And I'm going to add some articles for you to reflect on that and read about in the episode show notes. Before the pandemic, about 30% of those living alone struggled with loneliness, which is interesting because everybody that lives alone feels lonely, right? It's 30% before the pandemic. So that's the data that we have compared to lower percentages in those living with other adults and children. So if you're living with adults and children, you're not living alone and you're also not feeling as lonely. Although, like I said before, I think loneliness and alone are two completely different things. And I do see a lot of my clients telling me they feel lonely or showing me how alone they are in their job search, in their struggles, in their anxieties or dreams for themselves when their partner doesn't support them or their family doesn't understand them. There is that feeling of loneliness that comes from that. Another thing that I find really interesting is that loneliness is spread out, and it doesn't matter if you are university educated or not, if you are wealthy or not, if you have money in your pocket or not. The statistics highlight this multifaceted nature of loneliness that affects all demographics, all social and personal factors. And it underlines the importance of addressing loneliness as a public health concern, right? For the majority of my clients that are in their 40s and 50s and 60s, it's really cute. I just got a a contact form on my website from a 17-year-old asking for advice. And I'm like, "Oh, you're so cute and I really want to help you. But, most of my content is for your dad and your mom." So for my clientele, and they are more experienced, older, understanding that this can happen to everybody, understanding that, it can happen to you even when you are so successful, and understanding the nuances of this sentiment and this feeling that we have is important because we need to develop strategies to overcome it, and it then can have a significant impact in your personal, but most importantly, in your professional success, especially if you're job hunting. We want to overcome and combat anxiety, stress, loneliness, sleep deprivation during your job search because it will affect, if you're going through those challenges, it will certainly affect your performance during the recruitment process. And we can't have that happen, can we? We're trying to minimize that. That's the whole purpose of you listening to this episode in the Job Hunting Podcast. So, okay, so we understand now that loneliness is pervasive. It happens everywhere with, you know, equally men and women. Some differences there in generations, but frankly, not that much in my view. Now, there is also research looking at loneliness among unemployed individuals, right? So I want to highlight those key points for you because there is this evidence, which will surprise no one listening to this podcast, of the bi-directional relation between loneliness and unemployment, right? So there's a correlation there. If you're unemployed, you're feeling lonely. And that doesn't matter who you are. You could be the CEO of the company, you could be a truck driver. If you're unemployed, that feeling of loneliness will be there as a shadow. And you will need to understand that optimizing your job search and overcoming your unemployment is about dealing with a whole bunch of issues. And it's not just getting your resume done right or learning how to network, it's about dealing with your demons, right? There's another research that was done during the pandemic, and it looked mostly into young people, but I think let's extrapolate that a little bit. What it found was that unemployment was independently associated with greater psychological distress. So, trust, optimism, mastery, all of those measures that we usually look into because there's so great research and assessments that you can fill out questionnaires and assess that in people. They're well developed and really significant way of looking at psychological distress or positive psychology measures. Those really easy to do these days. But those the important psychological measures, trust, optimism, confidence, which is mastery, it decreases when you're unemployed, and financial strain and loneliness increases when you're unemployed. Okay, so those things were measured in young people. Surprise, surprise. No one is surprised by that. But why is it important for us to keep that in mind, right? It's because that's a recipe for disaster. If you're going through the recruitment process where you need to impress other people, most of them do not know you, right? You need to have trust and optimism and hope and sense of mastery and feel okay financially and not feel lonely, feel engaged, feel involved, right? So all of those things are the things that get people employed. So if you understand that there is a possibility, if you're not feeling it right now, but there's a possibility that unemployment can spiral down into those issues, then we need to make sure that we're controlling it. And that could be something you do, let's say early in the morning, an assessment of yourself, sometimes giving yourself permission to feel human and feel bad about your situation, but then picking yourself up, bouncing back, resetting. It's really important. So, this study from the pandemic is important because it also emphasized the impact of unemployment and psychological distress and the consistency of that, of what they found. The findings, very consistent links between unemployment and psychological distress regardless of the individual's resources and risk factor levels. Again, rich people, poor people, well educated people, not so well educated people, doesn't matter. Sometimes I talk to clients, and if you're seeking private coaching, chances are you have money in your pocket to pay for private coaches, and still they're incredibly concerned about their financial situation. The financial strain is there even if they have money in their pocket. So that's subjective measure and that's very personal and it happens to everybody. I think it's very important to understand that there is an interplay between your employment status and your mental health. That's not to say that when you get a job, everything will be better and rosy and solved in your life. I know this for a fact. I know that my clients get job sign contracts and then get really anxious about the first 90 days, the probation period, the fact that they're not handling it well or not understanding what they need to do. And there's so many other stressors that come from being employed, right? But let's focus on the unemployment period that you're going through. What we need is to develop strategies to support unemployed individuals, not just in job seeking, but also addressing mental health, addressing emotional well being, allowing time for socializing, allowing time for mentoring and coaching and friendship and hobbies and sleep and exercise and so on. So, we talk about all of these things on this podcast. I find that this podcast has become quite holistic in the way that it explains how to do a high performing job search. And it's really not just about the resume. And dealing with the recruitment in silence, dealing with the job search in silence is really what most people think they need to do, right? Like it is kind of embedded in our minds. It's like imprinted in our minds that if we don't have a job, we're less of a person. If you don't have an employer, you're not doing so well. We unfortunately have those feelings and we need to overcome them because you are not opening enough doors to let more opportunities in. Okay, so when you're dealing with job searching silence and all the waiting to hear from other people in silence, and that sense of being disconnected from the working world, of not knowing, not being able to control the situation, is really anxiety inducing. And we have in past episodes highlighted how career transitions, and regardless of how common they are, can still feel incredibly personal and isolating. We're so kind to other people when they lose their jobs, when something happens in their careers. We're so quick to support them. But then when it comes to us, we feel like we can't ask people for help, and we don't share how we feel with others. And job search loneliness isn't just about being alone, like I said, it is about feeling disconnected, unsupported, and uncertain about your future. And the crucial thing that we need to do is acknowledge these feelings as part of the process, know that they are likely to happen, and do something about them. Okay. I say all of these things as if it was always easy for me. And of course it wasn't. The reason why I became a career coach is because I've gone through so much in my career, good things and bad. And I've always had, for better or worse, I've always reflected on things probably more than other people, and sat down with that grief and sat down with the successes and sort of took notes. I don't know why. I knew I wanted to be a coach, but I started very early on. But I've often felt alone in my career choices, in my decisions. I always felt judged, because I was making decisions that were counterintuitive. And sometimes even I thought, in hindsight, a bit dumb, of leaving perfectly great jobs or opportunities behind and moving on to things that were uncertain, starting all over again from scratch. And, it made other people not able to relate to me. And I felt really isolated in my stubbornness, perseverance, grit. I don't know, call it whatever you want. So I felt alone a lot. When looking for work for the first time in Australia, I felt completely alone and desperate. I felt like, what am I doing in a country where nobody knows me, where there's no connection to my past and to what I can do? I have no reputation here. There's no equity here. There's no awareness of anything. All of those things that we take for granted once you are, you know, isolated from high school friends, high school connections, family connections, university connections, former bosses, like everything, is out of touch in a different language, even on the other side of the world. You can't imagine how lonely that can feel. And, it was really just a whole bunch of little lucky steps that I took without really understanding at the time. I was moving slowly, slowly towards my first job. And it came from extroversion. So I am becoming more introverted as I age, but I used to be extroverted. And that need to be around people, I think, really did help me open doors and have little opportunities come my way, most of them at the beginning unpaid, to be honest. But eventually, I was able to get my first gig in Australia. And I see that with my clients, once they understand the importance of leaving all those doors and windows open and getting out of the house and having conversations and being in the right place at the right time. Even if nothing happens for the first time, you are in the right place at the right time. And then you go again and you go again. And finally, it clicks. So, what I mean by that is that my clients that have been successful recently, especially post pandemic, are the clients that are out attending events, making sure that they're nurturing their connections, having conversations with people, asking for advice. So those things I think sometimes they're harder to do when you're unemployed, but they're more important to do. And then they should be kept ongoing so that next time you will have a better bigger, stronger safety net around you. So let's talk about strategies in a bit more with a better framework here. Okay. So, yeah, feeling of loneliness can be overwhelming. Are there strategies to help you navigate this time? Yes. Let's talk about them. We already did, but let's just make sure that we address them. First of all, yes, of course, networking. Oh, that word. We talk about it all the time. Staying connected with your professional community is so important. Engaging in events, online forums, professional groups. It doesn't have to all be face to face. It can be a webinar, it can be online, it can be a Facebook group or a LinkedIn group. We have a few episodes we did where we discussed the importance of building support networks. And I can think about the alumni one that I thought was important, and so many others. There's a category on my podcast for this. I'm going to put the link in the show notes for you to find out and see the links to some of these episodes in the show notes and go and check that out. You should check it out if you haven't really nailed networking yet, haven't really, don't really know how to present yourself in a new environment. You have disconnected from your network during the pandemic. You're not the only one. Lots of people have, myself included. Okay, so that is the first thing that can help you overcome loneliness. The second thing is routine and structure. Okay. I'm a big fan of routine and structure. And let's say you are an introvert and not a big networker, have a great routine and structure. See, these are pillars and they don't all have to be the same. If your strength is in being organized instead of networking with people, then focus on that. Create a daily routine. It really helps give your day purpose and structure, and it reduces the feelings of, you know, having being out of control in regards to your career. Job search should be very much a job. You are still very much a professional even though you are not employed. So we need to remember that and focus on building that routine of upskilling, reskilling, professional development, career development, and applying for jobs is just as a percentage of the time that you should be using during your day to have that full time job search mentality, right? So, applying for jobs is not what you do all day long, it's part of a comprehensive list of things that you should be doing. We have a resource for that in our website. It's the optimized job search schedule. So go have a look at that. There'll be a link in the show notes for you. Then self care. Okay. Focus on self care. If you've just been made redundant or lost your job or got fired or whatever, it's crucial for you to focus on that first. Okay. And then focus on that consistently. But first and foremost, self care, physical activities, time off, going on a holiday if you can afford, having a hobby, spending time with people you haven't seen in a while, people that can support you, can be incredibly beneficial to your brain, to the unwinding of the stressors of not only your previous job, because I bet your bottom dollar it was stressful, and then the stress of the letting go of the job, either being fired or being let go, the role being made redundant, whatever it is that happened to you is stressful as well. And your job and your brain just needs time to rewire without that stressor. So that's super important. We have episodes and they're under the wellness category on the job hunting podcast website. There are different categories there. You go to wellness, you will see a whole bunch of interesting episodes to focus on that if you feel like that's your weak link in the pillars that I'm talking about. And then the fourth pillar is getting support. So it could be support from having a structured course like the ones that I do. I have a very short, simple, but effective program called Reset Your Career. Then I have a more comprehensive program called Job Hunting Made Simple. I'm going to reopen the enrollments for Job Hunting Made Simple very soon. And that's a change for me because last year I only did it once. This year I've already run a session February, March, or was it March, April? Can't remember. It's 7 weeks of group coaching. And I am going to do it again soon. I decided it's for personal reasons. I was planning on doing it later in the year, but it won't work for me time wise. So I'm going to do it sooner rather than later. Join the wait list. There's a link in the show notes. Group coaching is awesome, everybody. People that do it love it. Not only you learn from me, but you learn from each other. There's just so much that you can learn. The network is fantastic. And I make sure that people that are joining the group are a good match for each other. If somebody joins the group, it's first in, best dressed. So, for example, if somebody joins the group and they are from the same organization as somebody else, then we need to have a chat and I need to make sure that that will work for both people. And if not, the one that registered second may not join. So I really pay attention to everything. So I just refund the money and I explain what happens. We think about different alternatives. Everybody gets the support they need. It's very rare that happens. It only happened once. And most of the time, it's all good. And it's Chatham House rule applies, completely confidential. What happens in the group stays in the group. And if anything, it's exponential learning from me and from everybody else. Definitely, you feel less lonely if you're part of a group of professionals looking for work together. And then remember that being in this situation between jobs is a phase, it's temporary and an opportunity for you to rest, relax, learn more about yourself, reset your career. I mean, that's the name of my program, the short program that I mentioned before. And every career will always have highs and lows. It will always have great times and bad times. You cannot have a long career and be working for like 20, 30, 40 years and not think that things like this will happen, that there will be low times and then there will be very high times. And know that you're not alone in this journey. Like, there's a reason why I read you all of those statistics, and the feeling of loneliness is valid, it's real. We shouldn't try to mask it or forget about it or not acknowledge it, right? There are ways to navigate through this. And I want you to stay connected with this podcast and stay active in your job search, active in your social life. And remember that we have a whole bunch of other episodes here that you can listen to that may give you more insight on specific things that we discussed today. What's in the episode show notes? There will be other episodes for you to look into. There will be articles for you to read and reflect. I found 2 articles or 3 that I think will be great to share with you. So I'll put them in the episode show notes. If you haven't subscribed to my newsletter yet, you might want to do that because I usually add a few more details there that I, don't share anywhere else. Plus, if you're interested in doing the group coaching, when it opens up again, I will let you know. Other services and ideas that I have for my subscribers, I share it in my newsletter. So it's good to subscribe, especially if you're job seeking. But chances are you will be job seeking sometime in the future. It's just a good newsletter to have there in the background, just waiting for you to activate when you need it. And then in the show notes, there's also a link to my career coaching services, my courses. So have a look at that if you need extra support. Thank you so much for joining me on the Job Hunting Podcast. Please give this show a 5-star rating if you're listening on Apple or on Spotify. On Apple, you can even write us a review, which will really warm my heart. If you're watching on YouTube, hi. You can subscribe, you can like, you can leave us a company. These gestures, they're small gestures for you, but for me, they're huge. They help grow my business. They help me understand what you like to listen to and why. So I'll see you next time. Bye.